Welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I'm Kate Dickerson. Today's episode is a conversation I had with Jessica Pawlak, Director, New Product Development, Biochemistry, and Serology at LCG Clinical Diagnostics. It was a delight to hear about her winding path in science and also why she takes time from her job to reach out to students at the Maine Science Festival, among other places. One of the cool parts of this conversation was hearing Jessica name all the people who helped her along the way. It was a great reminder to me that having people looking out for you can make a much bigger impact than you may be able to imagine. Our conversation was recorded in May 2026. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Jessica, welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I feel like we've been circling each other for a couple of years now because I often see you at the Maine Science Festival, which we will get into. And I realized you're just so enthusiastic about sharing bioscience with middle schoolers, which the enthusiasm for middle schoolers can be hard to capture in a bottle. So I was like, I got to talk to her and find out what the deal is, was part of it. And then I was like, she just has a good story. So I'm curious if you could, before we dive into kind of what you do now, how did you get into science?
So probably when I was like 9 or 10, my uncle died, and it just kind of made me want to be curious about what happened and why and all of that stuff. So from a really early age, my mom will always say, she just would say, I want to be a scientist. Like that wasn't even really a thing when I was little. It was people were like a doctor or a lawyer and those kind of things. And she said out the gate, I was like, I want to be a scientist. So it probably started right around then, and I never let it go. My mom said it was like a one-track mind.
So interesting. And was it always biology connected?
Yeah. So at the time, I was told he died of cancer. Later on, I found out he passed away from AIDS. And so it was always an interest in cancer and what causes that. And I think my brain just always knew that it wasn't a one solution thing for some reason. And so I let my life take me wherever it was going to take me to learn whatever I was going to learn. And I luckily had the best mother in the entire world. You know, I had a couple of people say to me, you can't be a scientist because you're a girl. Like, that's not a path. You don't do that. And my mom was like, you can do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it. And she just supported me from a very early age, letting me just do whatever I wanted to do to progress wherever I wanted to go.
You know, it's not trivial for a mom to kind of stand in as like almost this bulletproof guardian for any kid, right? To go against society's expectations. And did she have any background in science, or she just was like, she knew that's what you wanted and she wanted you to do it?
Yeah, she did a lot of office managing in different doctors' offices, but she wasn't working in like a hospital or a lab or anything. But she just was always supportive of whatever me and my brothers wanted to do. I think if I didn't have somebody who said, don't listen to what they're saying, you can do whatever you want to do, my life could have turned out a lot different.
It's pretty great when you look back and you think about the impact those words can have on you, which they sound just kind of rote and whatever, but if you really believe it, it really does make a huge difference. You have a degree in biochemistry. That is a relatively new field from the perspective of academics, which might be shocking to younger listeners out there. But I remember when I was in college, I want to say maybe they were starting to talk about a degree in biochemistry, like this idea that you would merge the two. Everybody in the academic world is trying to figure out what would you need from each field. So I'm curious, was that something that you were fortunate enough to come as it was just getting introduced? Because it's a cool field, but 20, 30 years ago, it was not recognized as its own field.
Yeah, so when I was applying to colleges, it wasn't a huge thing. There were, I don't know how many, I'm sure there were plenty of colleges that had the degrees, but there weren't 10,000 or something.
I mean, there probably weren't that many because it just wasn't a thing.
Yeah, it was relatively new and up and coming. So I started my college career at Hartwick College in upstate New York. I was kind of nervous to go to a big university. I had looked at University of Maine and loved it, but I was kind of one of those kids who was like, I need to get out of Maine and I want to establish myself outside of who I was here. And so I kind of, unfortunately, now looking back on it, kind of wrote it off. I ended up getting my master's from Orono. So I love Orono, and hindsight's always 2020. But my life wouldn't be where it was if I didn't make the choices I make. So I don't regret it. But I started at Hartwick, did 2 years there. They had a biochemistry degree. It was incredibly hard. So I think, to your point, it was the merging of two. It wasn't you were only getting half of one and half of the other. I was the only person in my college friend group who had classes all day long, labs all day long. Like, I was in school Monday to Friday, morning to night. And I didn't realize at the time how difficult it was going to be and how much different my college experience would be from like my friends who were majoring in one thing. But it was an interesting time to be part of it because I loved biology, but I knew it wasn't separate from chemistry. Like, there was just something in my brain that wanted to connect both and wanted to see the totality of things and not just be one thing or the other. So I really enjoyed it. Biology always came definitely way easier to me than chemistry. Anything in that realm, chemistry, physics, that kind of stuff, those were the things I had to really work hard at.
And you said you were there for 2 years, and then I happen to know you went to Boston College, which is not small and not in a small place. Like, I know it well. Where I went to school, we played them in basketball, so we would go there often, and it feels more Maine-like in that way. So Boston's a big switch.
Yeah, so what happened was I started at Hartwick the summer after my freshman year. I knew already I wanted to do an internship. So again, kind of in that time, it wasn't common for kids after their freshman year of college to already be doing internships. That was more like a junior year type thing. And so in Maine, we have like the most incredible research institute, Maine Medical Research Institute. I can't remember what its name is now. I'm sorry. It was Maine Medical Center for Research or something when I was back then.
I think they have gone with Maine Health Institute for Research, I think.
So it's been around for a while. When I first started, they were on John Roberts Road in a much smaller building. And they had an internship program mostly for sophomore, junior aged people. And I just, like usual, wasn't going to let that stop me. So I reached out to Dr. Robert Frizzell and just wrote a cover letter and stuff and just said, I know this is for older students, but I will do whatever it takes for you to take me in your lab. Like, I want this so badly. And I don't know why, but he took me as an intern. And so while I was there, he had a person in his lab, Lauren, who was just great. And she had mentioned she knew some people down at Beth Israel. And I just started thinking about Boston and my long-term plans. I loved Hartwick. I loved the size of it. I got the bulk of those intro classes done my freshman and sophomore year, where the small classes are more important, at least in my opinion. I didn't want to be in those beginning classes as one of 300. I wanted to be in the smaller classes and know my professor and that kind of thing. But I started thinking, like, Boston is where it's at, right? For biotech at the time, like, that's where it was. And I was like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to try. I never thought I'd get into BC. I've always been a good student. I never thought I was going to get into that type of school. And I did. And then I just never looked back. I went to BC, and it was like a middle-sized school. You know, it's obviously bigger than Hartwick. I fell in love with Boston as a, 20-something kid. Like, who wouldn't love Boston?
So did you go right away for a master's at UMaine? And who did you work with? I'm assuming it was a research master's degree.
Yeah. So I actually, my life is so crazy. This is what I was talking about. I just let my life take me wherever it was.
I think there's a lot to be learned from being really motivated about what you want to do, following a path that may not be forged yet, and just going for it. I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, I kind of just from an early start just said to myself, like, I'm never going to let somebody else dictate where I go. I'm never going to let somebody else dictate what I am interested in or what I'm capable of. There were a lot of people that were like, well, if you jump from this to that, to this to that, that's going to look bad, like in the end. And I just was like, I don't care. Like, if they want to talk to me, I'll talk to them and explain why I did what I did. So Lauren from the Frizzell lab had got me in touch with Alex Toker, who has this amazing breast cancer research lab at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. He still has it. And so I worked with him at an internship after my junior year, I think, of college. And while I was there, I just was like, I want to get my PhD, but I always wanted to be like the crazy scientist in the lab by myself. Like that's where I saw myself, like just really in it. But I wanted to make sure before I committed to a PhD program that I really did. So I did some research and found this post-baccalaureate program at the National Institute of Health. It's still around. I would recommend it to anyone who's thinking about going to get their PhD as an interim year. It was the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life in a lab. I mean, to be with that level of scientists, to be with that level of cutting edge research, it was like nothing that could be replicated. So I think it's still the case as post-baccalaureate, you had to have completed your degree and then applying to medical school or a PhD program. Like that was the stipulation. That was the purpose. And so I went and worked in the lab of Richard Mariah, and he was doing some research on mRNAs and the human law antigen. It was just the techniques I was learning in his lab. And that's where I kind of got this, like, I loved all the stuff I did in the Frizzell lab with Western blots and luciferase assays and making tumor slides like paraffin and all of that stuff. And then I went to Alex Toker's lab and learned like migration assays and how they replicate how tumors migrate and cell culture and all that stuff. And then when I got to the Mariah lab, it was working with radioactivity and that type of stuff. And to me, that was just so incredibly interesting, using something that was like, quote unquote, dangerous to you. But the amount of information you could get by using it. And it was kind of like, that's then when I was like, this is my plan. I'm going to get as many techniques as possible so nobody can put me in a box. And I had learned a lot of mouse stuff while I was at Maine Medical Research Institute. And I went to this cool program at the Jackson Laboratories, like this short course for mouse cancer models, and just learned every little technique. Because then no matter where I went, it didn't matter what the subject matter was. I could use that technique that I learned.
And so I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that you said you wanted to be the crazy scientist in the lab, and you went for your master's degree and realized that often the PhD people don't end up getting to do that work. And that was the inspiration to be like, I'm going to stop at the master's so I can keep doing the lab work. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I had gone to the University of Connecticut Health Center for the PhD program there. And I worked with some really great people there as well. And this one woman in particular, Min Fong, she ran the epigenetics lab there, like the clinical lab. So her job was like running the clinical lab and diagnostics, but then she also had a research piece. And so I was working with her for a couple years. So I was 2 years into my PhD. And then some stuff changed with funding. So I kind of had to make a pretty big decision of like, was I going to start over? I had another lab there I had worked in, the Claffey lab, who was also doing breast cancer research, some pretty cool like caloric restriction, antioxidant stuff with tumor growth. And so I was like, oh, I could go back and work in that lab and finish out my PhD here, or I could get my master's. And so I really took some time to think about it. And then my grandmother got really sick with gallbladder cancer. And I decided that I just wanted to come home. I just wanted to be back in Maine for a little bit and be around my family and not miss those last time with her. Then I had to really make a big decision. So I reached out to Bob Frizzell, explained to him what was going on. And he said, you know, University of Maine has this umbrella program. You can get your PhD through the program or your master's. You don't actually go to Orono. You just do your classes online, but most of your classes will probably transfer. And you can do your thesis here in my lab. And I said, you know, I really want to do it on breast cancer. That's what my interest is. That's what I've been doing for the past few years. And he was like, great. There's a Lucy Liao. She was doing breast cancer research. And so he was like, let's just look at the protein I'm looking at, Sprouty, in breast cancer, and then you can do your thesis on that. So I came back to Maine, did my master's thesis, defended it, and left with my master's. I decided I didn't want to keep going with my PhD. A lot of people had a lot of opinions about that, but that was what was best for me and what I saw in my career and what I wanted to do. So that's what I did.
So I appreciate you, first of all, explaining how complicated the whole process is, right? One of the reasons I like to have these conversations is because rarely is there a straight path for anybody in science. And that is based on watching a lot of PhD academics who don't get to spend as much time in the lab as they want. And that's different than purely research institutions and industries. It is really interesting that stopping at a master's, I do think there's huge value in knowing what works for you and what doesn't, and being really, really good at what you do. So your story is a synopsis of what I've been trying to have people understand. Like, life isn't all about being in the lab. There's these other things that happen, and that affects how people are. So one of the many reasons I wanted to talk to you is I realized, because of who I know and the world I populated before I did this, I don't actually know a lot of people in industry doing science research or managing. So now that we've gotten the background out of the way, if you could talk about what it means to be doing research and a team in the industry setting.
Sure. So I immediately after my master's went to work for Merck in Boston, like obviously a big biotech company. I thought that's what I wanted. It was not at all what I thought it was going to be. And I immediately was like, nope, I'm going back to Maine. I'm going to find somewhere to work there. And I quickly got a job at Watman. And then they got bought out by a bigger biotech company and closed the site. And so you can kind of see this repetitive nature in my career now where like I'm in something, funding changes, or I'm in something, and in biotech, it's not uncommon. You get bought out and the site closes. And so when the site closed, I really was at this impasse in my life of like, am I going to stay in Maine? What is even in Maine? And this is kind of what leads me to why I'm so enthusiastic about talking to kids about biotech in Maine, because my presumptions were wildly incorrect about Maine biotech. But at the time, there wasn't Maine Bioscience and there wasn't people promoting biotech in Maine. So I ended up, at the time, it was called Maine Standard. It was a very small biotech company, family owned by like a really great guy, Tom Happy. And they interviewed me. They're like, this is not breast cancer research. Like, what is going on? Why are you coming here? And I just told them what my skills were. And to me, and this is what I say to the kids a lot when I talk to them, is don't let somebody else tell you what your skills mean. Like, be ready to tell them. And they bought into what I was saying and hired me as a scientist. So I started as a scientist one there. So I was in the lab. I was developing products. Maine Standards in itself makes a product line called Validate. It's a linearity material. So this is how I explain it to my family, because nobody has ever known what I do my whole life. You know, they just say I'm a scientist and that's what that means. But when you go to the hospital and get your blood drawn and tested for cholesterol, all the labs are required by their regulatory bodies to ensure that they have quality measurement tools, including daily QC, as well as doing linearity to show their assay is linear. They have to do that twice a year for every assay, like cholesterol is an assay, that they run and provide test results for. And so we make that linearity material. So that's what I was doing for many years.
The quality control for the labs to show they're good. So you're developing that tool so they can confirm it.
Yes. So at the time, Maine Standards was just making the linearity material for twice a year. And then other companies would make the quality control daily QC. But then we were bought out by LGC. And then our name changes again to LCG Clinical Diagnostics. And so now there's many sites across the US that are owned by LGC and their clinical diagnostics umbrella. And that includes daily QC materials and linearity and molecular controls and all kinds of stuff. And so I was a scientist in the lab developing products. Our claim to fame is just, stabilizing different proteins. And so that was really cool. Like in your blood, they can tell by all of their studies how stable each analyte is. Like cholesterol is pretty stable, but there are some tumor markers that are not. Well, in order to have a quality measurement tool, somebody has to stabilize it in order to be able to make it, fill it into bottles, ship it to the hospitals, let the hospitals run it. So that whole process became interesting to me of, How do you do that? And so I just kind of worked my way up from scientist one to director of the new product development department.
It seems to me like your experience in all these different techniques prior to that helped you look at the whole as you moved your way up, because you could think about, instead of being pigeonholed into one area, you had this wider, broader foundation to think about. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about biochemistry, but I do know like protein stabilization can be really difficult. And I would imagine just understanding how different techniques work as you try to sort out, that would help you even just measure where you're going. So it's almost like you fell into the perfect experience for what you needed without even realizing that that's what you were doing.
Yes, definitely. 100%. I didn't know this obviously when I was younger, but looking back, I fully understand now why I did the things that I did, because my brain moves incredibly fast. And that can be a positive and a negative, especially when you're managing people. But I always was able to see that bigger picture. So like everybody wanted to talk about the little stuff. And then I was like, but it's bigger. And so I never wanted to manage people. I never wanted to mentor people.
There's an irony there, given how amazing mentors you had, but I don't think it's bad. I just think there's a little bit of an irony there.
It totally is. Everybody in my family points it out regularly. But I mean, I swore I was never going to be anything but a scientist at the bench. But again, life throws you curveballs. And I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. And I started having a really, really hard time pipetting and a really, really hard time standing at the bench or even sitting at the bench and that kind of thing. I had this really great set of bosses at LGC. And there was this manager at the time. His name was David Kelsey. He's been in the Maine biotech world for a long time. He's retired now. But he said, "You're getting a direct report." And I said, "No, I am not." And he said, "Yes, you are. You would be good at it." And this was probably the case where like I used to see things in myself that other people didn't see, but this was the time that somebody saw something in me that I would have never seen myself. I didn't think I was patient enough. I didn't think I could teach anybody anything because I just was in my own head. Like the way my brain worked, I didn't think I could think any other way than how I think. And he was like, "No, you're getting a direct report." So I got a direct report, and luckily she's like the most incredible person. Her name's An, and she now works at IDET. I mean, they're so lucky to have her. She is like the best. And so she helped me learn how to be a good leader. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't just me learning how to supervise her. It was like she was teaching me how to be a good supervisor and to listen and to stop and to slow down and just to cheer people on. Like that's really all people want. They want their boss to be on their side. You don't have to be some great, like incredible person. They just want to know you care about them and where they're going. And when there wasn't a next step at LGC, it wasn't a bad thing for her to move on to somewhere else where she can take a better step. And so thankfully, Dave pushed me into being a supervisor. And then my next manager after Dave retired, Ralph, just really helped me be a good supervisor and understand what that meant, and then grow into being able to be a manager and a director, because I had no idea what that even meant. I didn't want to do budgets and, I didn't want to do all of that stuff. But the strategic thinking and the mentoring and the new scientists, it like regenerated me. Like I was so sad about not being in the lab and having this autoimmune thing that was just, for lack of a better word, it was pissing me off. It was dictating. We had a GM, Michael Sweat, and he said to me one day, "Stop apologizing for your autoimmune stuff. You work 150% on your good days, sometimes 200%. Take your bad days when they come and stop entering every room and apologizing." And that was the first time I was like, I used to hide it from everybody. I used to try to hide it. And then I just was like, why is it a bad thing to have something that some days I can't get out of bed because I can't move? That doesn't mean I can't do my job. My brain still works. Sometimes I'm working on my computer in my bed. So I think I was so lucky to have such amazing mentors, most of which, and this is why I get mad when people say like women need women mentors. I think they do. I'm not saying they don't, but I think it's doing a disservice when you say that men can't be good mentors to women. I've had the most incredible male mentors in my career. People who never said, you're a woman, you can't do it. I definitely encountered that in labs. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Yeah.
But they're just often those folks are just looking for any reason to dismiss whoever they don't want there, right?
Right. But I just had these people who just were always cheering me on. And I think you reach a certain age and you just realize that it is about the next generation. It is about, like Ralph used to say to us, don't ever say I, it's always we in science. None of this happens on your own. Like, even if you did it, it's because of things that came before you and things that will come after you. Just always say we. And you start thinking about that, right? Like, what's my legacy? What can I give to the next generation? And it just gave me this new purpose for doing what I do.
Which is a great segue into how our paths crossed. So I actually am going to make you talk about this just a little bit. I've talked about the Science Festival plenty of times on this. I am not sure I've actually talked at length about the field trip day that we do. It's closed off to the public. It's only for 7th and 8th grade students. And I know you know this, but I'm trying to give context. We are trying to help students see what lies ahead for them. And one of the coolest sessions that we've done now for years is, I think Agnieszka came up with it, was what the heck is biotech? And it's different people most years who do it. We're trying to get the 7th and 8th graders to see like why what they're learning in school or will be learning in school makes sense. And the part that I've always appreciated that often happens when we do sessions like that is we really try to have a mix of people in the field. And that is everything. You know, like one year we did just health sciences, and I think we had like a CNA, a nurse practitioner, a medical researcher, an emergency room doctor, and a postdoc. Like, it was just trying to show that there's all these different paths and all these different kinds of education you need. So I've always appreciated who we've ended up throwing together for What the Heck is Biotech. You've been magnificent in doing it every year, and oftentimes the only industry representative, which I actually think is really important. But then you also do Maine Bioscience Day, which I have hardly ever talked about. So my question to you is, although you've answered partly, is, the mentoring, why it's so important. Since you've answered that part, what I really want to know is, what do you get out of talking to middle school kids for Maine Bioscience Day and then a room of 7th and 8th graders who may or may not really want to be in that session?
So for Maine Bioscience Day, so that's how I first got kind of in this realm of event. I've lost track of how many years I've been doing it, maybe 5. But I love it. It's become a tradition. My son helps me prepare everything. Like, I spend a lot of time and money getting experiments together. I love Mark and Jess at Greeley Middle School. They're the science teachers in 7th grade at Greeley. And every year they request me and I say I want to go there. And we talk about what they're learning and I tailor the experiments to what they're learning. It's been an iterative process. So like the first year was more like I stood up there and did experiments. And then I realized this is not fun for these kids. And so I think my most important part of that was telling kids there is biotech in Maine. So I started the chat with you saying, I didn't know there was biotech in Maine, right? And so I think that's where that first came. Like, I was like, oh, these kids need to know. It's important for me for kids to understand, not that there's just biotech in Maine, because there's like over 400 companies, but that we do some really cool stuff in Maine. And I learn something every year when I do these things. So I get that. Like, I learn the new companies and what they're doing. And like, I'm just spend a lot of time figuring out, wow, there's like a guy treating, I think it's like strokes or something with music. And then there's like this woman that's training dogs to like find endangered animals. And to me, I didn't know that. And so I figured these kids probably don't either. Like, if I'm an adult in biotech and I don't even know this stuff is happening, then they don't. And so I spend the first few minutes talking about biotech in Maine, all the different companies and what's going on. I mean, I say what my company does and where I work, but the focus is not that. Like, I'm not there to promote my company. I'm there to say there's 400 companies. There's degrees from associate degrees all the way up through PhDs in Maine. And you can do whatever you want to do. And also, here's some science. Let's have fun. And for the kids who don't like it, because there's always kids that they're in science because they have to be in science. For me, it's showing them that science isn't just about doing science. You're learning how to think. You're learning how to ask questions. You're learning how to create your own answers. Like you're not just hearing somebody say something and then believing it. You're learning that whole critical thinking process that everybody in the world needs right now. And I think for kids, if they can see that they may not like a subject, like I talk to my son all the time about subjects he likes and doesn't like, but they all play a role in your life and what you're going to do. So I think for me, it's just seeing the kids get excited because there's always the handful of kids who love science, right? And so that's fun for me. But it's also fun when the kid who hates science comes up to you after and says, I don't really like science class, but today was fun. Or, I've definitely had a couple girls come up to me afterwards and say, I didn't really think I could be a scientist or lead a group or do something. And now I think I can. That's why I do it. So then I'm involved in Bioscience Day. And then Angela reaches out to me and says, hey, we have this field trip day. And there was like an email and it was like, do you have any suggestions for like a topic? Submit your suggestion for a topic. And I was like, I don't really know what to call it, but I think kids don't really know what biotech is. And I think it would be cool for them to not just hear about the companies, but for me, it's important for them to hear the story. That's why I agreed to do this with you today. It's not that I think my story is any different than anyone else's, but I think kids don't see themselves all the time in the people that are around them. And they think one bad thing or one bump in the road is going to change everything. And you know what? It could, but it could change it for the better. So like if they hear stories about, oh, well, that happened, but then this happened, or maybe they can see a different path forward. So when I was getting together the group of people to do this for the first year, it was important for me to have people from university. I mean, I love the people that came from UMaine. They couldn't participate this year and I miss them, but they are doing such incredible things. So for the kids to like hear what they're doing at University of Maine, I love SMCC. I just think that program is such a good program. I've spoke there before. I think kids just need to hear what's available, and that experience is just as important, especially for me who hires people. I mean, sure, your degree matters to me, but if you can be taught something, I don't ever see it as a disadvantage. I don't ever say like, you don't have your PhD, so you're never going to be a senior scientist in my lab. In fact, nobody that are senior scientists in my lab have their PhD.
That's super interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking, because this is where my mind goes, we need to figure out how to do this session for grownups. Because one of my motivations for starting the festival was so people could see that we have all this science happening in Maine, because we don't talk about it enough and we don't talk about how good we are. And I have no problem doing that because it is that good and it is that amazing. And honestly, it's not like you guys doing the work have a whole lot of time to market yourselves. Let's be real. Like you actually do have a job and a mission and other things. But I do think it's really valuable for adults to know that these things are here so that they don't continue with this, I would argue, false idea that we don't have these things happening here. So I'm putting you on notice that I might make you do this for grownups in the room.
I'd be happy to. I had told Billy too, I love that it's being in 7th grade. It's giving people that kind of like, oh, this is what's possible. But I think, and again, to your point, like asking people to do multiple things, you get that limitation of how many people can do how many things. But I feel like high school kids too, after a freshman year, sophomore year, like that's when they really start thinking. There's a handful of kids who go into it knowing this is what I want to do. This is my plan. But like a lot of kids, it's not until the end of their sophomore year where they're like, uh-oh, I got to start looking at colleges. I got to start preparing for the SATs. And I think at that point to reiterate to kids the type of things that are going on. We've had some students do some internships at our company. And, like when there's a hiring freeze, that's the first thing to go to is internships, which really sucks. I'm going to use this opportunity to just tell your audience, I just wish all biotech companies would prioritize internships. It's how I got my start. It's how I made every connection that I have and what led to the next connection and the next connection. And to give kids that opportunity is the most important thing in their life, to decide what they want to do. They're in it. They're in it and they can figure out, oh, I don't want to be in a lab. Or like, not just I don't want to be in a lab. I want to be in a lab, but I want to be in operations, not research and development. Because there's two very different things. And I think when you don't have that opportunity in your state at a large scale, I think that's why people leave.
And I would argue also, as I've learned both through the Science Festival and now running the Discovery Museum, in order to have kids in high school have those opportunities and think that they can do it and they're interested in it, we need to make sure, like from age 3 up, we foster curiosity. And kids, they don't even need to think that it's science. And again, I've said this a million times, I don't want an entire world of scientists and engineers. Like, none of us want that, including the scientists and engineers who are working in the field. But I think if we don't introduce kids to what's possible then through elementary school, through middle school, then if they have one bad experience, they think it's not for them. And then when they're in high school, they won't even pursue it because they've already decided they're not the right person for it.
Yes, exactly. Somebody has said, oh, you're not good at science, you're good at math, or you're not good at science, you're good at English or history or whatever. And we play this wicked fun game. I think it was Liza who came up with it from UMaine during What the Heck is Biotech. There was a couple kids that were like, I don't know why I need to be here. And so we played this game one year, and now we play it every year. It's Stump Us. So stump the panel by saying what you want to do in the future that you think isn't related to science. And it is the most fun. Like, the kids get into it. We get into it. The kids really try hard. Even like there's been kids that are like, I don't want to do this, but I think you can't relate this to science. I think for me, it's important because you don't have to be one thing, right? Some people are like, well, I want to do website design and stuff. Well, biotech companies need website design. So if you love one thing, but something else makes you happy too, like I'm interested in science, but I love this, you can marry those two things. My favorite one is people say lawyers. I mean, patent lawyers all day need to know science. So like that one gets shut down relatively quick. But people always think lawyer has to be the farthest thing from science. There rarely is a job that is just one thing. And when you get to a certain point and you're managing people or coaching people or mentoring people or whatever the word is, it's even a little bit of HR, right? A little bit of understanding personalities and that kind of thing. So I think the more kids understand that, then they can see the benefit of all the classes they're taking, and they can understand why I have to take all of this stuff I don't like. Because I was the first person to say, I don't want to take it. I don't want to write anything. I only want to do math and science. Why am I doing this? Why do I have to write this? 70% of my job is writing stuff, presenting stuff. It's that communication piece, because your science really means nothing if you can't communicate it to other people. I had that aha moment. So like, why not try to help other kids have that?
Jessica, I really appreciate all of this. I appreciate your enthusiasm. I'm so psyched to have heard about your winding path background. If I had a model of like, science isn't what you think it is and how you get there, your background is it. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you. I love your podcast. I listen to it all the time, and I share it on my LinkedIn, hoping it will reach, other people that I'm linked to, because I think it's another way for kids to hear about or people to hear about what's going on in Maine. And I think it's really important.
Thanks for listening to the Maine Science Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by following us on your podcast platform of choice. And please leave a rating and review. It will help more people find us and help spread the word about some of the remarkable people doing science in Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is recorded at Discovery Studios at the Maine Discovery Museum in Bangor, Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is executive produced and hosted by me, Kate Dickerson, and edited and produced by Scott Loiselle. And the Discover Maine theme was composed and performed by Nick Parker.